When it comes to towing, seeing is believing. That's why Chevy Truck's advanced camera technology offers up to 8 available cameras for 14 unique views, so you can focus on the view that really matters. Chevrolet, together let's drive. Learn more about Chevy Trucks at Chevy.com. Safety or driver assistance features are no substitute for the driver's responsibility to operate the vehicle in a safe manner. Read the vehicle owner's manual for important feature limitations and information.
The Musial with Alan and Daniel. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. Everyone come gather round, listen to your favorite sound. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. We'll talk the games and all the rest, about the team that we love best. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. We're gonna talk about the Cardinals all night long.
Good morning and welcome into another edition of Meet Me at Musial. I'm your host, Daniel Shoptaw at C70. With me as always, Alan Medlock, a Medlock1, and we're coming to you Saturday morning after the Cardinals beat the Giants last night. Ryan Helsley with his 49th save, which is a new club record, taking over the reins from Trevor Rosenthal. And Alan, you have been a Helsley guy for a long time, so I'm sure you're glad to see him at the top of the list.
Oh yes, without a doubt. It was special last night. I was fired up to see how they handled it at home. You got to go for 50 in the next 2 days, right?
Yeah,
hopefully. Yeah, that's big. Graduates from the same school, all kinds of cool stuff. It's a big honor. It's awesome.
Yeah, and the Cardinals clinch a winning record. They clinched a non-losing record already, but they win their 82nd game. So no back-to-back losing seasons, which is mainly symbolic right now, but it's still something, right? I mean, I know that, the difference between winning 82 and 80 is not just a lot, but I don't know, psychologically, it just feels better. It just looks better. It's kind of a silly thing to kind of hang up on, but really we don't have anything else.
No, in like we talked about last week, to where the last 2.5 weeks have been enjoyable and fun to watch, and not like the season hasn't been. It was much. There were several times my blood was pumping this year to where I was like, okay, you had the last year that just seemed like the off year that you're kind of back a little bit, and then you kind of see like, hey, there's probably some cracks in the foundation a little bit, which we're going to get into later in the show, but. The last couple of weeks of baseball have been fun to watch, and a lot of the young guys are playing well, and in one of those, and to me, even to see that they're going to finish above 500, I understand it's not a great division, and you're going to, if it finishes, in the top 3 and one that you feel like you could have won that one outright in the offseason, there's still an element to me of positivity of, hey, things aren't as bad as they seem, and maybe we are a little bit spoiled, and that things may be closer than it's perceived, and I understand that may take a dip as we talk about things later in the show and some publications that were put out in the last couple of days, but it's been fun baseball to watch. There's still some enthusiasm to me about it, and I'm glad to end on a high note. And what's funny is they're 3-1 on a trip that I've always hated.
Yeah.
To go out west, and you're like, hey, if you can go 2-4 on that trip, you feel pretty good. And to where they are, I mean, hey, there's a lot of positivity coming out of it.
Yeah, I mean, when we looked at the schedule, well, whenever it came out, June, July of last year, whatever the case may be, but you look at that last week, and you're like, you better, if you're going to be in contention, you better get it done before before you have to go to Colorado and San Francisco to end the season. And obviously they weren't, they had done their job before that, I guess, if you will, as they'd already been eliminated. But still, you're right, to finish up with a good a good trip is nice. I know that the Rockies are the Rockies, and the Giants are kind of a team very similar to the Cardinals. So you're not playing, the best of the best, but anytime you go out west, it doesn't really matter. I mean, it's a rough thing. I pulled up, it'd be interesting what you're talking. I pulled up the month by month schedule or results. Um, and the Cardinals this is September. Let me make sure. I think it's probably counting last night. Yeah, it is. September is 14-10, which is actually their best month. They were 16-12 in June. So, but other than that, every month that they had, it's basically been right at 500, except
Mm-hmm.
August, which they were like 4 games under, which kind of, that kind of killed their chances. So yeah, we may be seeing the best baseball that they've played all year. And that's not saying a lot, but it is nice to not necessarily just be limping in, like last year, when you had Mason Wynn up, but you had already gotten rid of everything and, everything had just mentally shut down. At least, even though there's nothing to play for October, they're still seeing some relatively good baseball over the last few weeks.
Yeah, it's I've enjoyed it, and then you ask yourself, are you enjoying it because the pressure's off,
Mm-hmm.
and are they enjoying it because the pressure's off? You never know, but I mean, it's a lot of the young guys that are trying for a job next year, and that's intriguing to me, and not to keep giving hints away about I think everybody's going to come on knows what we're going to talk about, but it's nice to see the Walkers and everybody in the lineup every day,
Yeah, it
and
is.
probably something we need to get used to. I'm a big Sajacy guy, and that's been fun to watch, and yeah, there's always the depressing part, like to me. I know I've watched a heck of a lot more baseball this week than I expected with it being late, but the season to me is always the one that kind of bring a tear to your eye when they finish at home last
Mhm.
weekend,
Yeah.
and the way they finished, and it was exciting to watch, and then you go roll into a road trip that it's even the players were probably reluctant to be like, well,
Mm.
gosh, we have to head out west before the season's over, type situation, but yeah, it's been fun to watch, um it's been fun to see the young guys compete, and it- actually bring some enthusiasm for next year.
Yeah, I gotta say, after they finished the game on Sunday at home, finished the home schedule, and then they had off day Monday, it took me a while to remember that the season wasn't over.
Oh yeah, without a doubt.
Because there's
Yes.
so often they have finished at home, and that's that day after is you're done with the season, and so it's like, oh wait, no, they still got we're still done, we're still going here, we still got 6 games. So yeah, and again, later times the zones and stuff like that have been a little bit different, um, but yeah, it's nice to see. Still some decisions that are interesting. I still don't quite agree with the fact that they keep moving around Victor Scott the way they have.
It
Um,
doesn't make a lot of sense.
no, and I don't get that part, but it's also fair to say that a week or so is not going to make a whole lot of difference, probably. And um, I don't know. We'll see. So yeah, so we on the field is interesting enough, I guess. But off the field is what has kind of flamed into existence, if you will, over the last couple of days, because Katie Wu put out an article in the Athletic, and most likely, if you're listening to this, you've already read it. And if you haven't, you've already heard about it. But it was a in-depth article talking about how the Cardinals have lost their way. I think Katie uses that phrase a couple of times in there. Have gotten away from development, have gotten away from, they've kind of, it really, to me, Ellen, and you read it too, but to me, it sounded something that we've talked about quite a bit, that the Cardinals just, I hate to say it, but got complacent. They thought they had this all figured out, and they didn't necessarily need to continue to innovate, continue to put resources in it. They could just get by, and eventually they found out they couldn't.
Yeah, no, I agree, and it's one of those that we've talked about on here. I'm going to give you a lot of credit for this. You use the term insular a lot
Mhm.
in the past 4 or 5 years. That's yes, we may be too bound for glory with some of this, and that other organizations are figuring it out and bypassing them, and I think that it's bit them, and I think that that pride was a lot of the issue here. And that may be oversimplifying things. I'm not certain, but yeah, I think that the lack of the lack of backing up a developmental department, and being locked into what you felt was right has burnt you and may have set them back a few years. But at least we're starting to get these things are starting to be recognized. I mean, I think there was a part of the article yesterday that was completely refreshing in the fact that, okay, now we've seen the problem, but I think they're admitting to what it is. And there's going to be a lot of moving pieces on this. I'm not so certain if even those pieces are going to be completely visible, to the outside fan. But it sounds like there's going to be some major changes behind the scenes that lead to more promising times.
Yeah, I think there has to be. Now, those promising times are not going to be next year, and that's the thing. It's going to be an interesting and balancing act for us as fans as well, right? I mean, because we have gotten used to a competitive team, and people might argue we haven't seen it in a few years, but I think even even this year, they're in the wild card hunt until right at the end of July, and really into August they were at least within shouting distance. Um, last year was of course just a slog, but other than that, they're a team that even if they don't make the playoffs, they're in that hunt. Excuse me. And I think next year is probably going to be the first year in a while that you go into this collectively. I mean, the people, as a group, I think most of us will go into it expecting probably a third place finish, right? I mean, thinking that because assuming we see what we think we're going to see this winter, um, the resources are going to be taken from the major league level and put toward the development level, which is honestly, probably well past due. But that does mean that the product that we are expecting to see, that we see, I mean, because most of us are watching the major leagues and not the minor leagues, and we're definitely not seeing the technology behind the scenes and the training and all that kind of stuff. That the product that we see on the field in St. Louis is probably going to be downgraded for the next couple of years, and I think there's a mindset of adjustment there.
Yeah, no, I to where, like we talked a little bit pre-show about mindset and what the expectations would be in each faction of the fan base of the the, the casuals. What are things going to look like, or let's just say around Major League Baseball. What are people going to think that is going to happen in St. Louis? I, for one, I feel more positive now that there's a plan in place than I have been in recently, because, like I said, we've talked about this for 2 months about they're middling. It's and we've talked about it for a while, that are the playoff pushes late to no avail, is that the worst things that could kind of happen. And and maybe they have been. I don't know. But, like, I want to see extended time for Walker, for Gorman, for Donovan, for look what it's done for Wynn. Patience. I mean, he's arguably their best player. So JC, Burleson. There's a lot of those guys that I'm like, okay, I'm willing to watch a season similar to this one for the young guys, because I think in my mind that's a huge win if they are where they are right now with those same guys, which in theory they are right now.
I mean, yeah. I mean, you could argue that what they expected out of Goldschmidt and Arenado especially wasn't there, and didn't get them to where they are now. It's still fair to note that Goldschmidt leads the team in home runs, right? I mean, he's not. Even though it's been a down year, and I know home runs is not everything, obviously. I mean, in the whole of his game has been lesser. I mean, without him and without Nolan, where would this team have been as well? I don't know. It's interesting to think about, but yeah, for the most part, what the success they have had has come from the young players, mainly Mason Wynn, and he's not a young player, but I mean, if you're looking at MVP of this team, it's Ryan Helsley, right? I mean, just because of how many of those games last year they probably would have lost because they couldn't lock it down. Anytime you save 49 of 82, that's something. So yeah, I'm interested to see what they do. I think Monday they've got a press conference, and that's probably going to line out most of what this is. But the change in philosophy is going to be just fascinating, I think, and seeing how fast and how they're not how fast because I think they're going to start now, but how they're going to start implementing this. Is this a situation? Do they come in and say Mo is here, but kind of in name only, and we've got a new guy that's coming in that's
Yeah.
gonna really be we've got our successor, he's gonna be our assistant Pobo, but he's taking the job next year, and he's he's gonna have most of the authority here, and Mo's gonna advise, or are they gonna say, "Hey, we're gonna spend the time looking for one this year or this off season or next year," but Mo's pretty much still got control of everything. What does Chaim Bloom do? Does Chaim Bloom take that player development role, or does he become that guy that is Pobo in waiting, and then he hires a guy to do player development? I don't know. I think there's a lot of I think we're gonna have a lot of things to talk about after this press conference because it's going to be a significant, maybe the most significant change that the Cardinals have had since they shifted from the Walt Jocketty method of
Yes.
getting a whole bunch of free agents long-term contracts to what they should have been right now is that development stage that Jeff Lonow led.
Yeah. That's exactly where I was going to go back to. That exact moment. Whenever the Mo was brought in to bridge the gap between the Jocketty era and the analytical era, and to you kind of heal some wounds that were evidently there.
Yeah.
My question to you is: Bloom going to be on the dais for the presser?
I think if he's sitting up there, that's a very big indication.
I wonder.
That things are
In
changing.
Katie's article, when it said one move has reportedly been made, it made me think, hey, this could be, this is. I'm gonna kind of get my blood flowing a little bit. I'm thinking this could be awesome.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting enough to note. He was hired as a consultant, and at one time, his family was still in Boston. I think they might be still. But it really kind of sounded like he was testing the water. He was doing this job, but it wasn't necessarily a long-term thing. Katie noted that at some point in time in the summer, he was hired full-time. So he's going to be part of this organization going forward. I mean,
I'm glad you said that. I did not know that.
I didn't
By the
either
way,
until
that
she
was
said
that.
it.
Okay, good, because that was news to me. When I read that, I was like, did I miss that headline somewhere? But okay, go ahead.
No,
Sorry.
and I think I've noticed other people said it was. They never really said that he had been hired full-time. They didn't, even when we were podcast today, right? It was Mo said, "Hey, he's been working on some projects for us and stuff like that," but it wasn't any indication that this was more than a contract job. But now it sounds like he's got a W-2. So he's going to be
spoken like a Jew
right.
accountant. There we go. Yeah.
But he's going to be part of this organization going forward, and he's going to be. I think he's going to be a significant part. Obviously, it just depends. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think most likely he takes Mo's job, but all indications are he's really good at the development side of things, and I could imagine a situation where he takes that Gary LaRocque job because it's a little bit less pressure. And even though it's going to be it may be not less pressure actually, because it may be the focus of the organization for right now, right? I mean, it's going to be the thing, but you don't have to deal with, you don't have to deal with agents. You don't have to deal with trades. You still have your input on those things, but you don't have to actually be the person in the spotlight. And that may be appealing to him. If his desire, if his real true love of this what he does is to develop players, he may say, let me just do this, and then they hire somebody else, because I think there's some really interesting options that might be out there, to take the GM spot or the president of baseball operations spot. I don't know how that's going to go, but if he's on that, I think if he's on that stage, he's going to be probably taking over Mo's job, because I don't think they put him on that stage unless, because the media's going to ask you questions, and I just don't know that they put him up there if he's just in charge of development. So if they walk out and he's there, I think that's a big deal.
Yeah, and I kind of thought the same thing. It was you talk about making an announcement before the press conference starts. That would be it. But I almost expect it though.
I mean, yeah,
I think
I don't know.
if you there's a part of me that says if you don't, there's not going to be a whole lot of belief that things are changing.
And that's fair. But it's also fair to say if he's up there, you figure there's going to be a lot of questions about what did you see in this organization that needs to be changed.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And that may not necessarily be what the Cardinals want out there. Now, I mean, obviously there are things that need to be changed, and they're going to address those, but they might rather have a little bit more control over it than the media questions for Chaim Bloom. And honestly, I mean, if Chaim Bloom's up there, there's a good chance that nobody else gets any questions, right? I mean, even if he's not taking over, I think that there's gonna be a lot of face to that. But I mean, at some point in time, they've got to start that transition, and if that's the situation, then yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if he's up there. I mean, I know Gersh is often up there in these sort of things, even though he doesn't really get many questions. But if Chaim Bloom is up there instead of him, that might be telling.
Yeah.
So,
you bring them all out, and it'll be a firing.
Bring everybody out, and then nobody, and then everybody gets overwhelmed, and that nothing gets asked. But yeah, I think this is going to be really, really intriguing. Katie also got into, and this was something that also came up at Blogger Podcast today, because Jason Hill asked the question, because he's big on doing payroll stuff over at Viva Alberto's. And he asked if there were different budgets for the different things, for minor league work, for coaches, for all this stuff. And Mo basically said, no, there's one pot of money. And everything comes out of that one pot. And Katie referenced that as well here. And that, and saying that that's part of why the minor leagues has been, and the development side has been neglected, is because they've taken that extra money and put it toward the major league squad. Like it's, X amount. Well, it's like, well, we gotta buy pitchers and stuff like that, and there's not anything left for the minor leagues. I think that I understand that concept, and I wrote about this at the Substack as well, but I'm not real sure that that's the best way to go about it. What do you think?
Yeah, there's a part. No, I agree, and maybe I'm riding the fence on this. Mm-hmm. It's just hard for me to believe that there's just. I always feel like they're not as upfront about their finances as most.
That's fair.
Or that they're just overly cheap. I mean, I don't know what. In your situation, I would think that not their finances, but you see the behind the scenes. You see how the cake's made in these situations a lot. I know it's not an infinite amount of money, but I think that you could satisfy both wills with that.
I think you could. It just depends on how you want to approach this, right? I mean, if they're approaching the Cardinals as the Cardinals entity by themselves, which they seem to, right? They don't really do a whole lot. Whatever Ballpark Village makes doesn't necessarily flow over into the Cardinals. That's a separate business, basically. Anything else is separate businesses. So it's just the business of the Cardinals. And the business of the Cardinals not only has to make money, but it has to pay dividends, not only to the DeWitts, but to all the ownership group.
Yeah.
And so I think it's probably safe to say that Bill DeWitt, they get into the planning, they get into the budgeting, and he says, okay, well, it looks like, you're going to need $200 million for this year. So you've got $200 million. Make sure that bottom line is, after taxes, interest, and dividends and all that is, at least zero. And you do how you want to do, which to some degree is okay. That's at least trusting your front office staff, right? That's trusting the baseball people to do the baseball things, and you've given them the resources to do it. But I think it would just be a lot better. It's like, okay, well, I'll give you 165 million for the major league team, but we're going to put $20 million in the minors and $15 million is going to go to infrastructure. Because I mean, we talk about that as in regard to the stadium, right? They were, Bill DeWitt III has said, they put it to $15 to $20 million a year set aside to put upgrades at the stadium. Well, why aren't they just doing that to do, upgrades in their minor league, upgrades in their development, and instead of forcing Mo to make those kind of decisions? I don't know. I think that's where I would go at it.
No, agreed. And it's it's eye opening to see the lack of jobs that they have.
Oh yeah.
That was the thing that bothered me the most. Is I was like, man, I mean, you can simply look at anybody in your division line to line and see what they have. X amount of guys dedicated to this, and we have zero amount of guys dedicated to this.
Mhm.
I was like, I understand. I mean, we're talking about money, but that's also, I mean, I don't know how to put it. I mean, that almost sounds criminal. That I'm a poor choice of words, probably. That other organizations have done this, and that you just failed to do it.
Yeah.
And like I said, not only is it just job and title, but those are lives as well. And that's, to me, I was like, man, that sounds really narrow-minded.
Yeah, and I mean, I know Jose Akindo could play 9 positions. It doesn't mean he has to have 9 jobs,
Exactly.
I mean,
No, exactly. He's one of my favorites, but I'm like, this sounds. I mean, this is knucklehead.
yeah, I mean, I get, there's a definite reason to put Jose Akindo in front of your, I've forgotten exactly what the job title was, but he's basically their minor league coordinator, right? I mean, he's the one that's in charge of all the minor leagues to some degree. And that's great, but again, he's 61. He's been in baseball a long time, so doesn't mean that. And I'm not casting aspersions because I mean, there's no doubt he can still do the job. But I mean, one, at that age, you need the help, right? I mean, the bandwidth is not necessarily there. He's had physical problems. I know he was off with feet problem, broken ankle and stuff like that. That's one reason he left.
Knee replacement at one
Yeah,
point.
I think so. Yeah, stuff like that. And I mean, again, I just and I kind of went over those in the Substack. But the hitting side has the two. I mean, there's 5. Okay, for those that didn't read, they have 5 minor league coordinators. The Brewers have 17. The Mets have 15. They're ridiculous behind. And on the pitching side, especially, they're older. The hitting side had a couple of younger guys that are that seem to be well in tune with some of the more modern techniques and metrics and all that kind of stuff. But the pitching side, the little bit that they had, was older or had been more established. And then you have Jose Kindo in charge of all of this, which again, I'm sure he's up to date as much as he can be, but there's a difference between, and I know this because some of the new metrics that came out, I mean, not even new metrics. I mean, WAR and stuff like that came out after I was, fully involved with stuff. So I know these things, but I don't, like know these things. You know what I'm saying? It's not ingrained in me like batting average, home runs, RBI are, right? Because that's what we grew up with. So the new metrics, I know them. I know they're important. I know, roughly, but are they, as ingrained in Akindo and stuff than what he came up with? I don't know. Maybe they are. Maybe he's a better learner than I am, which is not unexpected. But I just, again, there's an advantage to having experienced people that can know how things were done and can kind of temper some of these new strategies that don't always take that into account. But you need some young guys that can, give that excitement, give that enthusiasm, give that new ideas, because I think, kind of getting back to what we're talking about of being insular and being stagnant, Okendo's been in this organization since what, 1984 or 5 or whatever. I mean, he's been here forever. There, one of the other pitching, Tim, let me see if I can find it now. Yeah, one of the other coordinators has been with the Cardinals almost 20 years. It's there's not a whole lot of new blood in that situation, and maybe that's one of the things that they're going to change this offseason is, they're going to spend some of that money and add some positions because they're going to have to add. I mean, at the minimum, they need to double their staff.
Yeah, I mean without a doubt. I mean that's going to be. How do I say this? Is that going to satisfy the public's bloodlust? That are we going to be in for another? Is it going to be, how rough is it going to be next year if they revert back to 23 instead of playing at a 24 level, where most folks are going to believe that, okay, the sunnier days are ahead, but next year may not be. What's that going to look like?
Well, I think if they've put a season together of young guys, then majority of fans are going to understand the growing pains. They're not necessarily going to be happy if they win 75 or less, but I think they'll understand it because these guys are growing and they're kind of developing. You're just sticking with them. I mean, you're going to stick with Jordan Walker all year long and not jerk him around. You're going to, ride Nola Gorman through the good and the bad and be able to really evaluate these guys at the end of the year. I think what's going to be more frustrating is if they still have, if they have a rotation of Gray, Fetty, Michaelis, Matz, and Palante, because I think there's going to be some people that, those ones in the middle, the Michaelis and Matz, are kind of just taking away spots away from
Agreed.
Graceffo. And I mean, because Quinn Matthews is knocking on the door, but I don't know that I don't think necessarily development wise is great for him to be starting the season, but he's probably done enough to be considered for midseason. Tink Hence is coming, although it's still, he's got to show still some not consistency, but being able to stay on the field to some degree. But if you're losing with young pitchers and young hitters, people are a lot more forgiving of that than when you're losing with old guys that are spending a whole lot of money on that we're kind of tired of. I mean,
yeah, agreed. And I think that if last night wasn't the Michael Swan song, I think I think the backlash will be pretty substantial. I mean, I would think that, like we talked about last week, like me personally, I think at most you bring back one of those four guys, being Michaelis, Matz, Lynn, Gibson. It's funny, Lynn does a fairly regular spot on foul territory, and I don't know. I haven't convinced myself that he's out of the picture yet.
I don't know. And then honestly, there's a strong argument, and I would not have expected this in May, but there's a strong argument to bring him back versus Gibson, or, well, I mean, there's obviously, I think we would have expected a stronger argument versus Matz and Michaelis, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, like I said, both those guys may be guys that they decline the option on and then see if they want to resign at a little bit lesser rate because they're coming back at
agreed.
what, $12 million or something like that. I think that, yeah, Lynn's talked. I don't know. I mean, I haven't watched him on foul territory, so you have a better idea than this than I. But some of his comments, especially after his last start in Busch, were kind of like, I want to keep pitching, but I also realize that I can't all the time.
Well, and it's funny. You're right. His line was, "I want to keep pitching, and I want to do it close to home because this year's been very nice."
Yeah.
So I mean, you can draw a lot of lines. I don't know how much he wants to do. I think there is a part of Lynn that likes to do it in St. Louis, and which tells me he could probably sign here if they wanted to do that. Now, the flip side to that, to me, not necessarily about Lynn. They're going to lose money this year because they're going to be trading away. They're going to be eating contracts that they're trading away, I would assume. and
Yeah.
that may limit the fact that they can't bring anybody else. And then that's another thing that preempts the fact that they're going to go with young guys as well.
Yeah. I mean, and see, it's that catch-22 as well of you want to develop these guys. You need to develop this this whole thing. But, if you start a season with Quinn Matthews and Tink Henson in your rotation, is that really going to develop them? Do they need more time in the
Agreed.
minors before they
Yeah.
can get in the major leagues? So how do you balance that? And usually how you balance that is by getting cheap veterans that you can dispose of whenever you need to.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it may be a situation. And honestly, that's an argument for Lance Lynn because Lynn spent half his year on the injured list. And so if you get a Lynn, if he can pitch, especially if he can pitch for $6 or $7 million, there's going to be opportunities most likely to, promote somebody to fill that spot for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month. A chance to test somebody out and not necessarily have to rely on them. So I don't know. I mean, but you're right. What's Michaelis's contract for next year? It's like 16, $17 million. It's more than I'd like it to be. Maybe it's 50.
Yeah.
Maybe it's 50. But whatever
They're
the
going to be
case,
paying it regardless, whether
yeah.
he's in that uniform or
I
not.
mean, that's the
Yeah,
case. I
you're
mean,
right.
there's no way. Somebody talked about attaching him with Helsley, but you just bring down Helsley's value when you do that. I mean, if you're going to trade Helsley, you trade Helsley, right? And get
Yeah.
best options out of that. So yeah, I don't know. Michaelis is fourth highest player. He is getting $16 million next year, just like he did this year. He has award bonuses for Cy Young, but I don't think we're going to have to worry too much about that. So yeah, I mean, how much are the Cardinals willing to take a dead money hit? And I think that that gets into we were talking before the show. Katie also talked about the three big guys, I guess, big contract guys that are on this team, and Sonny Gray and Wilson Contreras and Nolan Arenado, who all have no trade clauses, but also all did not sign up for a rebuild. And so could be maybe wanting to be open to leaving or waiving those no trade clauses. And a lot of people focus on Nolan Arenado in that situation, and I get it because Nolan has struggled, especially over the last couple of years. And I'm biased because I love old Nolan Arenado and I want him to finish his career in St. Louis. But I also feel like, that's probably $20 million dead money that you're just going to have to give away for somebody to take him on and get any kind of thing back. And it's probably still just a AA lottery ticket. If you want actual quality for Nolan Arenado, you might have to pay almost the whole entire salary. And if you're paying the whole entire salary, why not have Nolan Arenado on your team? So, because I think there's pluses to having him on the team. It's not like, not just the money. So, I mean, what kind of dead money hit are they willing? Are they willing to just waive Miles Michaelis? Are they willing to waive Steven Matz? Or do they feel like Matz can be a bullpen guy and it's worth them? Obviously they're losing Paul Goldschmidt. And again, I mean, it feels to me like that, we talked about that as well, and he's probably not coming back. We'll come back to that because I think it's a little off topic here, but so I don't know. I mean, what are they willing to do? And if they're willing to take, $16 million here and, $8 million there or whatever, how cheap is this payroll going to be next year if all this is coming out of one bucket?
Yeah, no, and I completely agree with that. There's not a lot. If we talk about the one bucket policy, which had that Mo had said they had, there's not a lot of money that you can eat, but I think there's some that you have to. Now, I also think that there's enough information out there for Nolan and enough for Contreras and enough for Gray that you could probably convince yourself, even playing youth, if you kept those three, you probably are where you are right now. And I don't know if that's a bad thing. You know what I mean? I don't know if that sets you back so much.
Yeah. No.
And I think that you could convince yourself that, hey, this is who we are, and the youth movement starts, but these three are still along. Because I don't know why I would be surprised if Gray is traded.
Yeah.
I think that you could probably look at a situation of Gray, Freddie, Palante, and then it goes from there. Unless you trade Palante at a peak right now, I just don't see him doing that.
Mm-mm.
I think they're pretty impressed with what he's been able to do, and then you just build from there, and build from what's in your organization. If you remember, I didn't see it reported, but well, and also off topic, and we can get to that on the Goldschmidt side of it too. But no, I think that you could talk yourself into being a heck of a lot better than you are, with it also being a reset, not a rebuild, and keeping the three of them, and it not hurting what the long term plan is going to be.
Yeah. I mean, I think, again, if you're looking at people that have value, if you're trying to just think, okay, who can you trade and bring in young prospects that'll help you jumpstart this development process? Now, one, it doesn't necessarily do you any good to bring in young prospects until you have some sort of development process in place, right? I mean, because these
Yeah.
guys aren't going to get any
Yes.
better. So I
Yes.
get that. But assuming these are guys are coming in at an advanced state that can help you maybe cushion as you start to continue to develop. Your people are probably Contreras, Gray, Helsley. That's probably it. I mean, that you're actually going to trade. Obviously, if you want to trade Mason Winter, Jordan Walker, or something like that, probably, but still, that's kind of defeating the purpose. Um, so, and we've talked about it. Helsley feels like the most obvious move. He's
Yeah.
going to get most likely $7.5 million in his last year of arbitration. Does a team that isn't necessarily planning on contending need a closer that's getting paid $8 million? Obviously Jojo Romero and others aren't going to be as good as Helsley, but Helsley's not going to be as good as he was this year. I mean, I think it's fairly safe to say. I mean, 49 saves is tough to duplicate, and he's been really good all year long. He's going to be good. Don't get me wrong. I just don't know that he'll hit these levels. So it feels like that's an obvious one. But the other one is probably Contreras, because you're right. I don't see them trading Gray, because if you trade Gray, you basically are waving the white flag and say we're just gonna. It's not tanking, but we're tearing it all down, because you have nothing in that rotation after Gray. I mean, we don't know what Fetty's going to do this year. He wasn't as good with the Cardinals as he was with the White Sox. He's coming into that second year away from the Asian
Yeah.
leagues, which we have seen. First year great, second year back, not so much. You've got Palante, who did make some strides this year, but still, would be going into really his first full year as a starter. And then whatever else is there, either it's the old guys that we're trying to get rid of, or, fresh people that we don't know about. So I think you have to keep Gray just to, have some semblance of respectability. I've talked about
Yeah.
why you don't trade Nolan, but as much as, and I don't really want them to trade Contreras, because he was one of the best bats. He's the guy that wanted to come to St. Louis. He's been an amazing personality and a leader for this team. But when you look at Ivan Herrera, Pedro Pages, Jimmy Crooks won MVP at Springfield this year.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of catchers in this organization, and maybe you could trade one of them. Maybe you trade a Herrera. Maybe I think Herrera's the only one you could trade. I don't think you trade Pages, because I don't think there's that much value to him. I mean, he's a good guy. He's a good backup. He's a good player, but I think he's just not have a trade value.
No, I agreed. And until he runs up against the money cost, he is a Cardinals player through and through. The Cardinals have always kept kept a guy like that. I've thought about that quite a bit.
And they've obviously, they favored him a lot over Herrera until this last week, when Herrera got
Yeah.
actually, and then Herrera DH'd a lot.
Yeah, that will be. I'm curious to see how they play how that bat plays out.
But if you're trying,
that will be one of the big questions.
yeah. But if you're trying to save money,
Agreed.
I mean, Contreras' contract is not terrible. He would probably bring in some value. I don't think so. I think I don't know how they would go about it, but I do think they have to do something with the catcher's position, just because it really is starting to get to be that kind of backlog that we've seen the Cardinals have so often, is that they let things stagnate, they let things pile up, and then they become forced to trade somebody off. And they either pick the wrong one, or by the time they do it, there's no value to these guys. So I think I think if there is going to be a new approach, somebody's going to do something about the catcher situation.
Yeah, yeah. I think that the bat will play, and with being with Herrera, but I don't know if he's ever going to catch. Whatever they do back there, I hope it turns in. If Contreras is the guy, which I would assume is probably. I don't know why I feel like I ride the fence on the trade on him. But gosh, I hope defensively they get better about letting guys just run on them like crazy, because they were terrible.
Yeah.
So whatever rebuild happens, I hope that it's not a situation where it's just ugly to watch, because they can't have a guy. They don't have a staff that holds them on, or catchers that throw them out.
I still wonder, and again, we know that Yadier Molina has had lots of issues apparently in Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
I mean, just the situation that's kept him away from the organization. But I can't help but think that, more than being a manager in waiting, which I don't think is a good idea.
No.
And we've talked about that before. But if he couldn't be that catching coordinator, right? And it's difficult, because so many times a Hall of Fame player can't necessarily translate what he does to other players. But I mean, it's like I just do it, like Stan Musial said, you just wait for a strike and hit it. That kind of stuff. And they're not always great instructors, but Yachty's taught people. I think I think we've heard people like Carson Kelly and Andrew Kisner and others that have come up through this organization that have talked about how much Yachty has improved them and helped them. So you feel like he could do some work with these guys coming up that might help them, not because that was part of Kay's article about Herrera, and in that idea that Herrera would have learned a lot more of this at the minor league level, or had been able to been if they had some sort of catching coordinator, that he could have improved his game before he made it to the major leagues, and they don't have it. And you wonder if maybe a Yachty is the kind of guy that can do that. It's not a situation that locks him down to you have to be in the dugout every single day. It feels like that's a situation he could really help the team if situation warrants.
Yeah, and I'm curious if that name gets brought up, if Molina's name gets brought up on Monday, any at all. I'm sure the question will be asked. But, on the development side, I would think that that's probably a pretty substantial name. And I mean, it was brought up in the article how catching is kind of, Molina being Molina, ultimately held guys back, which we talked about that 10 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you never want to be the guy that follows the guy, but
No.
But yeah, it is amazing how they just thought a legendary talent is transferable, to some degree. Like, oh well, everybody can do this. No, not everybody can do this, and we've seen it, right? I think I saw a stat that the Cardinals were 30th in catching runners this year, and I don't know if that was accurate or not, but I would believe it. And that's a long, long way from what Yadier Molina was doing. So we've talked a lot about who might be coming, and we referenced it a minute ago, but Paul Goldschmidt plays his last couple of games under this contract as a Cardinal, today and tomorrow. With this change in focus, and with all the information that seems to be out there about what the Cardinals want to do, is there a scenario where Paul Goldschmidt comes back next year?
I think it's dangerous to think that it may happen. I walked away from yesterday's article thinking that he will not be back, because I thought, one, that's the money that they're not willing to spend, and two, money they shouldn't spend in that spot. I went back and forth a little bit, thinking that he was going to hit his way to convincing them that it would benefit to bring it back, but I just don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah, it becomes very tough for me to see that. Again, he's been pulling up his baseball reference here, 95 OPS plus, which means he's just been slightly below average there. 1.2 WAR, which is, I think 2 is kind of like what you expect out of your, kind of the minimum. It's not been there at all. Again, he leads the team in home runs, but even that's down from last year, and that says more about the team than it does about him, I think. Um, I think there's, again, would love to see him finish his career in St. Louis, and he has said he wants to play, but I got to feel like there's somebody out there that's willing to give him more money for a kind of a part-time role. And the Cardinals, I mean, will they offer him some sort of, cut rate deal and let him come back and kind of be maybe not the starting first baseman, but, majority starting first baseman? Maybe. But when you're looking at how they're using these resources, and especially if they're thinking they're going to get rid of some of these, some of this dead weight, it becomes really hard to see how
Yeah.
he's coming back. I hope that he finds someplace to land, but there's also, I mean, he wants to play, but there's a strong argument that, maybe he's kind of hit the end of the rope.
No. Yeah. Yeah. Agreed completely. And it's a sad state of affairs, but I think that even this conversation of let's keep bringing these guys back has put them where we are.
Right.
And
Right.
that's I think that that's the easy move right away, and it's kind of sad to say, but someone will take a shot on him
Yeah.
just because, like you said before the game, or before the show, he still leads them in home runs. Someone's going to see that and think, hey, that's a DH type first base. I mean, a dang good first baseman.
Yeah.
So you never know, man. I mean, I would think that that's close to 0%. Well, I don't want to say that being the Cardinals still, because even though that article came out, I think there's a little bit of mistrust. But I don't think let's say I don't think the optimal move is to bring him back.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, if he decided he wanted to play it some sort of incentive laden deal, and then you really thought that you could catch a little bit of Paul Goldschmidt, a rebound, then maybe. But yeah, it's so hard to imagine that, given what he's been, and again, he's had his hot streaks, but they haven't lasted real long.
Yeah,
And so I do, we'll see. I mean, he may go to New York and hit 25 home runs. We'll see, but um, I think it probably is best. And you're right. I mean, you're right. This is part of what the Cardinals have gotten themselves into the situation, is because they can't they can't let go when they should. And I think to some degree that's, you don't want to follow a team that is so cold and calculating that doesn't play a part, right? I mean, that you
yeah,
can never get attached to a player, because as soon as they lose any value, they're gone. I don't I don't I don't want to be following a team like that. I do like legacy players. I'm glad that
yes,
they kept Adam Wainwright around, even though it was iffy on whether he was going to be any good. And I'm glad that they let Yachty finish out his career in St. Louis and stuff like that. But you have to draw a line somewhere, right? And you can't, not everybody can be that way, and you kind of have to make some tough decisions at times. And I think this is probably one of them. As much as it would be nice to see Goldie, I mean, and right now, what I mean, Goldie's probably, he goes in the Hall of Fame, he probably goes in as a Diamondback, right? I mean, or maybe a blank cap, because there's no overarching thing, but I don't think, I think you can only do one or two of those at a time, and Nolan Arenado might be the one the one I'm going to pick here, because that may be the situation where they're going to make him that legacy guy. I don't know, but I think that yeah, I hate to say it as well, but I think it probably is best for the Cardinals to move on.
yeah. No, agreed. I mean, and I feel like that is an easy first move to show that, hey, we're allocating resources elsewhere.
Yeah, yeah. Um, Katie's article did say that they expect all the coaching staff to be back. Which was a bit of a surprise to me, because I felt like Turner Ward, and especially Turner Ward as the hitting coach, was going to be gone because the season's been terrible, right? I mean, and that was just kind of that easy thing to do, even know how much impact it would make. Obviously, it's something wasn't working. And I really felt like that was a situation where, what are they doing here? Why are they not doing this? And then somebody came along on the Substack, because I did add that in there, and pointed out, and I think very fairly, that if Mo is going to be is not going to really leave till 2026 or at the end of 2025, and then your new guy takes over. Then when the new guy takes over, he's probably going to want to clean house, right? Unless there's a good chance that Ollie gets fired and everybody else goes, and they just get their own people in here. In which case, what kind of hitting coach wants to get in here for a 1-year deal? And I guess that's fair,
Yeah, that's a
right?
good point.
I
Yeah.
mean, it's difficult if you want to get talented people, unless you can. Now, the other side of that is if it's the situation where like Chaim Bloom is going to take over more control this year and has the ability to hire and fire, then maybe they do. You hire the hitting coach, and if there's a hitting coach out there they want, and if it doesn't work well with Ollie, then Ollie's gone, at the end of the next year. I don't know, but I think that makes there's a lot of sense in that there's no point, because everybody on the coaching staff is kind of a lame duck until the next guy comes in. And so it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to fire somebody just to hire and fire another guy.
Yeah, that's what kind of surprised me about bringing everybody back in the article, because I was thinking, well, is this just a one more year show me when they've already told us what they're going to show us, and that's going to be everything allocated to the development side, which that's what we want. But it doesn't make a lot of sense to bring the band back together, essentially. I mean, like I said, you and I talked before the show. I mean, I think there's a little bit to me of, not that I'm an anti-Marmol guy at all,
Right.
but I feel like, you could bring in Schumacher from what he did as a player. If you could convince him to come here and it be, like you said, the Bloom Schumacher era, I think that probably moves your ticket sales needle a little bit next year. And that there's the belief that, hey, we're changing some things up, but it's not so far from what it used to be with Schumacher. And I don't know. That checks a lot of boxes to me.
Yeah, I can see that. I do think Ollie's been fine. And, again, 90 something wins his first year. Last year was not all his fault, although when you get into the Contreras stuff and some of the other things, you don't know how much he played a part in that. Although it seemed more like the pitchers and such. And then this year, they've overachieved compared to their, run differential. So, some of that has to be in managing, and some of it's just, hey, he knew when to get to Ryan Helsley, and the bullpen was good. And he made the right moves, though, to get those guys in. I don't feel like there's been a whole lot of questionable stuff with Marmol. Maybe this idea that, when they brought Jordan Walker up to be that platoon bat for a week and then he didn't ever play, maybe there was something there. But for the most part, I mean, he's been fine. And I don't know how much you put a blame on him. So, yeah, I don't have a problem with him coming back. And I think to some degree, again, it's, 3 years, right? I mean, he's still kind of figuring this out. And I think that's where we've kind of gotten to, it's weird to me that we've had so many managers in such a short time for the Cardinals after having 3 over the span of 35 years or something like that. So I'm perfectly fine with letting him run it out a little bit, because, it also depends on how much does a manager actually, how much input are they having, especially these days when the front office has so much say.
Yeah.
I get Schumacher would be a name, and I think there's some interesting things there, but would it really be different with him than Ollie? I don't know. I mean, and I don't, I'm not sure that not knowing is enough to pull that trigger.
Yeah. That's a good point. I mean, it's any of this. We're building up the Monday press conference to be the biggest disappointment we've had in years, to be honest with you.
And honestly, I'm not 100% sure they've announced it for sure. I mean,
I know it. I thought the same thing.
I know Katie said reference. Jim. Most of the media is referencing it, so I'm assuming that if they haven't announced it, they've at least said, hey, be available because we may have
Yeah.
one. But I don't think that the Cardinals have said, oh, it's going to be at 2:00 at Monday afternoon press conference. So hopefully we have one Tuesday or Monday. We'll find out. If they don't, I guess we can speculate wildly from there.
Yeah, that's it. I'm kind of curious because I thought, well, we've heard that it's going to happen, but I don't know. It hasn't been concrete, so I don't know. It's going to be wild whenever it does happen, I would think.
Yeah, and they've been, except for last year when they really needed to have one and they didn't. They've been fairly good about having one as soon as their season was over. Whether that was postseason or regular season. So, and if they're going to have the kind of buzz and changes that we think they're going to have, I'm sure Major League Baseball would prefer them do it before the playoffs get started.
Agreed. Agreed.
We know that they had to get special dispensation to fire Mike Shildt, in the midst of the playoffs, which still seems a little weird, doesn't it? But especially since now Mike Shilt's in the playoffs. But so I feel like if they're gonna, have anything more than, well, our your normal standard typical press conference, then they probably do need to have it Monday while everything's taking a break or waiting for the Mets in Atlanta to play.
It's kind of cool, to be honest with you.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot that's going to come out. I'm very interested to see how much of this they take to heart. I'm very interested to see how they respond to this stuff. And like Kyle pointed out at Blogger Day, he asked a question that kind of was critical of how the development was going. And instead of Mo answering the question, he asked who was saying that and then kind of went off on a tangent about the players and stuff like that, that had said that, less about the question that Kyle had. It will be interesting if they address some of the stuff or if they kind of talk around it as well, or if they try to use the media thing as a deflection. I don't know. We'll see. I think that, I do think that they're fine with this story coming out because I think it helps set the tone for next year that people are already, I think, for me, you read that story and then all of a sudden you're like, okay, well, you're almost already mentally changing your perspective from, they need to go out and get Corbin Burns so they can compete next year too. Okay, well, next year's going to be a rough year, and they're focusing on the development. I mean, the mental mindset just of that story, I think, helps shift the fan base in a way that is favorable for the Cardinals, because I think if they're going to do this development thing, they need people to know they're doing this development thing, and that's why they're not going out and getting Corbin Burns.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point because there was, what was it, 2 or 3 weeks ago that I made the comment, hey, if you're going to do this and you're going to really move people and you're worried about people, more worried about fans in the stands, I said you've got to go get somebody. So especially someone that's dominated the Central for so long. But yeah, that's out the window now. I would assume, that this is going to be that the process is starting, the process that some have asked for several years. So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't. They're probably not going to be linked to any of the free agents at all at this point. And you know what? There's a comfort level to that with me, to where it's like, okay, now there's a direction, because that's the caught in the middle situation bothered me more than even the losing situation last year. I was like, this is going to be a mess for a while because I can't figure out either direction to go.
Yeah. I do think it's going to make for it's going to be a little bit frustrating at winter, right? I mean, because all this stuff that we're talking about the Cardinals doing is stuff that we don't see on the face of it, right? We're not going to get a whole lot of articles about how they hired 3 new coordinators or something like that. I mean, it may get mentioned, but it's not a huge, and we can't, a lot of times in the winter, we are trying to talk about who the Cardinals might get or that. And, I don't think we're really we may have trouble talking this winter, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
I just don't know where the not that it's not needed and not that it's not important and not that the Cardinals do anything wrong. It's just on the face of it, what do you get excited about this winter? Are there I mean, because you're right, there may not be anybody the Cardinals are linked to any kind of news at all.
Yeah. It's are they even going to go? They're even going to attend the winter meetings? I mean, yeah, no telling. I mean, I don't know. It's that's the one disappointing part of it now, because that's where the juices get flowing, and you're thinking, I mean, this could be awesome. But yeah, I mean, I would expect some boredom this offseason. I mean, I think that the excitement's going to come from the potential press conference that they have. I mean,
Yep.
because that's going to map out everything, I would hope. Now, like I said, knowing them and knowing how vanilla they are, it could be the most boring one we've had, and we really don't figure anything out. And I think that will be terrible for sales.
Yeah. I mean, they definitely have to kind of put out what they're doing. And I think that's the biggest thing. We talk about the fact that Cardinals fell short of 3 million this year. And a lot of I would imagine, I haven't heard anything, but I would imagine a large part of that is they did not have the season ticket sales that they had before, right? Because you came off of last year and people were not necessarily committed to this, especially when all you do is go out and get Lance Lynn and Gibson. I mean, Sonny Gray as well, but um, there was an idea we don't know what this season is going to be, and I imagine their ticket sales were down, and that probably was enough to at least keep them from 3 million. Um, so yeah, I think if you're going out there, and of course, and they're probably out there right now, right? I mean, I'm imagine there's people calling around season ticket holders saying, "Hey, you really didn't buy it," or if they're not, they're getting close to it. And how do you sell that? How do if you're not going out there, you've got to be out there saying, "This is our vision," and come see the new guy. We're going to play these young guys. We're going to play Jordan Walker every day. You get to see Mason Wynn every day. Um, you know, Lars Newmar. We're gonna, come watch the guys. Come watch the new guys. Come watch this foundation. Be here on the ground floor, type of thing. I think that's probably your only thing. But I think you're right. They have to say in the press conference that this is their direction, because otherwise, people are kind of like, well, what is going to happen?
Yeah, that's I think a lot of the apathy in the fan base starts with the apprehension of trust that they even know what's going on, that they being the front office, and I think that needs to be mapped out one way or the other. If there's a clear plan, I think that there's going to be buy-in. They just can't screw this up. I mean, it can't be like I said, this from a guy that I like, and that I think is getting beat up here at the end, and it's probably not deserved. Mo speak this one.
Yeah,
I mean, it's going to have to be pretty direct.
yeah, and I know I agree. I think most tenure here has been a remarkable tenure. I do think, like anybody, and Dane Perry had a nice thing at his Substack about things that Bill DeWitt should say that he probably won't. But one of those is, I think that every executive has a shelf life, and
Yeah. Oh yeah.
it's very good possibility that Mo kind of reached his a little while back, because things, baseball changes so significantly that it's difficult to keep on top of these things. I mean, I bet when Mo started in 2007, I'm sure, and my guess would be the winter meetings were done mainly face to face, and now everything's done by text. And I mean, because we've heard that change, right? That's just one minor thing. I mean, things that used to be done one way are being doing another thing, and you can adapt, and he has. But there comes a point where, I mean, one, you don't want to, and you get to that spot where you've been successful. There's no need to, or at least, and that's the mindset, right? Or you just can't anymore. And I think that's fair, right? Because he's had some good things, he's made some good moves, but you can also see a lot of these contracts that didn't necessarily have to be made, and we said so at the time, right? Why are you extending Miles Michaelis when you don't have to? Why are you spending so much money on Brett Cecil? Why are you things of that nature that have just kind of been hits and misses, and so yeah, it's good that he can go out kind of on his own terms. It's good that his contract expires and he can just kind of either get a new job in the organization or go enjoy his retirement or whatever he wants to do. But it's also good that it feels like change is coming.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that was the part of the, while it seems like a dagger of those articles coming out, and Mike was saying the same thing for months of the lack of development and why these guys are coming up and faltering. Yes, it seems so detrimental to the organization, which it is, but it's more refreshing too that now these things are being recognized and being reported and potentially being fixed.
Yeah, definitely so. All right, well, we've gone our hour, and I don't. I feel like again, I'm not sure there's anything left in Cody Katie's article. There probably is because it was very fully done. And if you haven't had a chance to read it, find a way to do so. Is there anything I missed that you think we should touch on?
Yeah, it was pretty thorough, and I had a feeling we would go long today, and it was very refreshing. But no, it's great piece of reporting, and yeah, you can just tell that the sentiments are out there, and that there's enough word leaking out that yeah, change is coming, and how substantial it is, I hope we find out soon.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So we'll be back with you next week. We'll talk about the end of the regular season. We'll talk about this press conference that hopefully is happening, and anything else that might be coming along. And then we'll see how the winter goes. I mean, usually we're here pretty good through October, and then the holidays hit, and we're a little bit less because there's not as much going on. But we'll see how things go this winter and what there is to talk about. But until next time. For Alan, I'm Daniel. Good night.
Good night.